ever feel like your brain's playing this worst case scenario highlight reel, like on repeat, and then, try to add on the weight of eternal damnation to that?
Ooh.
Yeah, that's where we're diving deep today.
Okay.
We're looking at religious trauma syndrome,
Right.
catastrophizing, and the fear of the rapture.
Yeah, it's fascinating how specific religious teachings can really latch onto those like very human anxieties we all have and just amplify them.
Right. Like, we're not just talking about, like, missing a deadline here.
Right.
We're talking about being left behind at a cosmic level.
Yeah.
So, to unpack all of this, we're looking at this article from Cheap ABA called Understanding Catastrophizing and the Rapture, Exploring RTS.
Okay.
And, RTS is something that we see a lot with folks who come from high control or fundamentalist religious backgrounds.
Yeah, and it's not about, criticizing the beliefs themselves or anything like that, but more looking at how those environments, how those settings can impact someone psychologically.
Totally. And this article really focuses on two major players in this whole thing.
Right.
And those are catastrophizing and the fear of the rapture.
Mm.
Now, I know we've all read about the rapture, but, like, imagine if you are someone who's hardwired for catastrophizing
Oh, yeah.
because of, your background, your upbringing, whatever it may be.
Right.
Suddenly, this idea of being left behind becomes less of a theological debate
Right.
and more of a daily, like, visceral fear.
It's like that drop in your stomach when you think you've messed up or done something wrong, but magnified 1,000-fold because the stakes are, well, eternity.
Exactly.
And what this article does that I think is super fascinating is it digs into how a lot of times this fear of being left behind, it often stems from these deeper anxieties about, worthiness and acceptance that often predate the religious teachings themselves.
Almost like those anxieties, those fears, they found the perfect breeding ground, so to speak.
Exactly, yeah.
Now, let's zoom in on catastrophizing for a sec, because it's not just everyday worrying.
Right. It's not just your, I'm going to be late for work. It's this unshakable conviction that the worst possible outcome is the most likely one.
Right.
And for someone already processing the emotional fallout of religious trauma, coming out of that can be completely paralyzing.
It's like your brain's stuck in overdrive.
Yes.
And it's just hitting the gas on those what-if spirals.
Totally.
And, this article, it lays out some of the hallmarks of this kind of thinking.
Okay.
And the first one is that you're constantly bracing for the worst, right?
Right.
You're convinced it's just around the corner.
Oh, absolutely. And it's exhausting to live like that.
Yeah.
You're just bracing for impact all the time, and it makes it really tough to engage with the present moment fully.
Totally. And that kind of leads us to the second hallmark that the article brings up, which is overgeneralization.
Oh, well.
Misstep,
Right.
maybe a moment of doubt,
Yeah.
and boom, it colors every experience going forward.
Mm-hmm. And this is where those rigid interpretations of religious teachings can be so damaging, right? Because
Well.
there's no room for grace.
Yeah.
There's no room for nuance,
It's like one crack in the sidewalk becomes the Grand Canyon
Exactly.
in your mind.
Yes.
And another thing the article points out is that feeling of utter powerlessness that comes with this.
Oh, yeah.
Imagine believing that no matter what you do, the outcome, divine judgment, it's already been decided.
It's a recipe for chronic anxiety, the sense that you're always on the verge of some terrible, inevitable fate.
And when your worldview, like, already has you walking on eggshells,
Yeah.
right? Like, you're constantly afraid of messing up.
Right.
Then this idea of the rapture becomes almost unbearable.
Absolutely, yeah. It's like this looming threat that's always there, constantly reminding you of, your shortcomings, your perceived shortcomings, and the potential consequences, right? And the article, it really gets into the weeds on how this fear can manifest. One way is that constant worry about being left behind. And often that's tied to, like, deeper fears, right? Fears of abandonment, rejection.
And we're not just talking your average fear of missing out,
Yeah.
Like, this is about being found, like, unworthy
Yes.
in the eyes of a higher power. It's
Unworthy of love, unworthy of belonging.
Yes, exactly.
And the article, I think it makes a really good point of highlighting how this ties back to those teachings about conditional love and acceptance, right? It's like, if you don't meet these very specific and often honestly unattainable standards, you're left vulnerable.
Exposed.
Exposed, exactly.
Like living under, like, a cosmic magnifying glass.
Yes.
Where every little, imperfection is magnified 1,000 times over.
Exactly. And that's where the guilt creeps in.
Yes.
The article talks about how this whole idea of the rapture, it can really fuel the cycle of self-judgment, especially for those who've internalized a very like strict, unforgiving interpretation of sin.
Right, because every mistake you make, every doubt you have,
Becomes evidence, right? Becomes
yes,
evidence against them,
right.
reinforcing that fear that they're not good enough, that they won't make the cut. And that type of thinking, man, it can really disconnect you from the present moment.
Yeah, so you're not just worried about the future.
Right.
You're missing out on right now.
Exactly. You're hitting pause on actually living because you're so busy waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Yes, exactly. And it's that disconnect, that constant focus on this, potential apocalyptic event
Yeah.
that can make it so hard to invest in your relationships.
It's hard to invest in relationships. It's hard to invest in your own personal growth and just like enjoying the experiences of life, you know? And this is where I think that catastrophizing and the fear of the rapture, they become like this dangerous double helix,
They feed off of each other.
Yes.
It's like a 1-2 punch of anxiety.
The article actually uses this really powerful example. Imagine someone who's prone to catastrophizing because of RTS, right?
Okay.
They're at a sermon, and the sermon's all about the rapture. And the preacher is really emphasizing the suddenness of it, the lack of warning, and their brain already wired for these worst-case scenarios goes into overdrive, right?
Right.
They start thinking about how they haven't been devout enough, they've made mistakes.
Oh, man.
It's a guarantee in their mind that they're going to be left behind.
And because they're so used to seeing the world through that lens of fear and judgment, it's just confirmation.
Yes.
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy of, I'm not good enough.
I'm not good enough. Exactly. Right. And that can lead to some pretty intense anxiety. Like the article even talks about that, how everyday things, just normal, everyday situations, they become these triggers. Oh, wow. Like what? Give me an example.
Like, a passing ambulance,
Okay.
a thunderstorm, they hear a car backfiring, and it's like,
oh, man.
just a reminder of their perceived unworthiness.
We're talking panic attacks.
Panic attack.
Obsessive thoughts.
Obsessive thought, this constant low-level dread that something terrible is about to happen.
And then, of course, come the coping mechanisms.
Right, which, as the article explains, are not always the healthiest.
Right, because they often involve things like avoidance.
Avoidance, which, I get it. It makes sense, right? You want to steer clear of anything that might trigger those really intense feelings of fear and guilt.
So you avoid social situations, you avoid talking about your beliefs, you even avoid loved ones.
Right, because they may not understand.
Exactly.
And while that's understandable, this avoidance, it only digs that hole deeper. It deepens that isolation.
Exactly.
It prevents people from seeking out the help and support that they need, from realizing that they're not alone in this. Right. And it's like we were saying, as if the emotional toll wasn't enough.
Right.
This article does not shy away from the physical impact.
Oh, no.
Of this toxic cocktail we're talking about. We're talking insomnia, fatigue, chronic stress. It's just a reminder that while religious trauma is rooted in beliefs and experiences, it manifests.
Yes.
In very real physical ways.
It does, absolutely. Chronic anxiety doesn't really play favorites, right?
Right.
It impacts your sleep, it impacts your energy levels, your immune system. It even, studies show that chronic stress like this, it actually increases your risk of heart problems down the line.
Wow.
It's a whole mind-body connection. And this is actually where I think the article takes a really important turn. It moves from understanding the problem to actually exploring potential solutions.
Because here's the good news.
Yes.
Healing is possible.
It is.
It starts with understanding, okay, these are the patterns, this is where these thoughts are coming from, and realizing you're not broken.
No.
You're just wired a certain way because of your experiences.
You're not alone. It really is. Like you're rewiring those neural pathways in your brain.
It's wild.
You're shifting from just autopilot to conscious choice.
And this article, it brings up some really, really powerful tools for this.
Okay. Yeah.
And the first one, honestly, is therapy.
Yes.
Finding a mental health professional, someone who understands, like, the nuances
Yes.
of religious trauma.
Absolutely. And I think the biggest thing there is it's not about, judging anyone's faith or anything like that. It's about having a safe space.
Right.
A supportive space to just process those experiences and start to develop, healthier ways of coping.
It's like having a guide through the wilderness.
Yes.
Someone who gets it. And speaking of tools, the article brings up CBT.
CBT.
Cognitive behavioral therapy.
Right.
Which, in a nutshell, is about learning to spot those thought patterns,
Yes.
like the I'm not good enoughs,
Yeah.
the end is nears, those spirals.
The catastrophizing.
Exactly. And learning how to challenge those.
It's like hitting the brakes on that runaway train of thought
Yes.
and learning to ask yourself, hold on a second. Is this actually true, or is this my past talking?
It's about taking back control of the narrative.
Yes, exactly.
And, one thing that the article really stresses is that, it doesn't have to be a solo mission.
No.
Finding community,
Yes.
connecting with other people who get it.
It's huge. It's so powerful because there's this validation in knowing that you're not alone in this,
Of course.
that your experiences are valid, that
Yeah.
healing is possible.
It's like finding your people, your tribe.
Exactly.
And then, for those moments when that anxiety feels just completely overwhelming, the article also suggests, some practical things you can do.
Yeah, like mindfulness,
Right.
grounding exercises,
Big
just
clue.
simple things,
Yeah.
Taking a deep breath, feeling your feet on the ground. It's about pulling yourself back to the present moment instead of getting swept away by all those what ifs.
It's about anchoring yourself in reality.
Yes.
Reminding yourself, I'm here.
You're safe.
I'm safe. I've got this.
Exactly.
And then finally, the article emphasizes the importance of education.
Yes.
Like learning about religious trauma.
Right.
Understanding the dynamics of high control groups.
Because that knowledge
Because that is power.
it is incredibly empowering.
It's like shedding light on those shadowy fears.
Yes.
It's realizing they lose so much of their power
They can't survive the light.
when you drag them out into the open.
You said it.
And so, as we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
what's your biggest takeaway for our listeners out there?
For me, what really stuck with me from this article is just the reminder that healing, it's a journey. It's not a destination.
That's good.
There will be ups and downs. There will be moments of doubt, maybe even setbacks. But, there's immense strength in simply acknowledging those experiences, seeking out support, and recognizing that you are not defined by your past.
Beautifully said. And, if you're out there listening and you're feeling stuck, just remember, there are resources out there.
Yes.
There are people who understand.
You're not alone.
And recovery is possible.
Absolutely.
This article from Cheap ABA is a great starting point.
It is.
And just remember, asking for help is a sign of strength, not weakness.
It's a testament to your resilience, your capacity for growth and self-discovery.
So true. Well, deep divers, we've covered a lot of ground today.
We did.
Remember, keep asking those tough questions, keep seeking those aha moments, and keep diving deep. Until next time.